Welcome to the CS Time Clock web interface, session 2, adding employees. In the last training session for the CS Time Clock, we covered the menus in the system. In this session, we'll be setting up employees, but first we'll be setting up a few system parameters to facilitate that process. So if we look at the menus on the left-hand side, under the setup menu, we'll use the arrow to drop that down. We'll set up departments in the clock. Click on departments. I've already configured a few here, but to insert more or to change those, you can either click on the edit icon to change the one that's there, or you can insert a new one. So we'll just insert a new one called packing, and then press add. And now that'll appear in the list of departments. The next thing to set up is the payroll export you're using if you're going to use a payroll export. So from the same menu, the setup menu, down to payroll exports. There's currently already one in there, but if you wanted to insert another one, you can just press the insert button, call it the default export if it is the default export. I'm going to do a second one for MYOB, which we'll call 14 days. So this is a fortnightly payroll for using the same one, MYOB. Select it as being MYOB from the list. I'm going to put a path in here for the payroll export, and site code is not necessary. And then I'll add that record in. And now I've got two different payroll types, one for weekly. I'm going to edit that one now because it's not very clear. So I'm going to edit that one and change it to MYOB weekly. And I'm also going to put a path in for that one, the same path as before. Site code not necessary. And save that. Now in a later session, we'll cover the more complex settings in payroll exports. So jumping back to the Browse Employees screen, now that we've set up the departments and the payroll types, we can continue setting up employees. Setting up a fingerprint employee needs to be done at the clock. And when you set up a fingerprint employee, they will come through in the system without any employee details except for the employee number. So if you went and added employee 112 at the clock using their fingerprints, it would show up here as an employee 112 but without a name next to it. And you'd know to go in and edit using the edit tool, the actual details of the employee. But if you're adding a proximity user, then you simply go to the insert, put the employee number in, add the first name, the second name, the pay number if you're using pay numbers in your payroll system. In this case, we're going to do that later on. Access level, if you want to give them access. Generally speaking, we wouldn't recommend you give them access to the system at this stage, but later on you can give that employee view-only access, and then you would also give them a password. You can add their department, and you can add the payroll type that they use. If you terminate the employee, you put a termination date in there. Generally speaking, we leave the statuses out, which means the first time the employee clocks in, which is generally the day after you've registered them, then their first clocking will be an in-clocking. And then you can add that into the system, and that employee is added in. The next thing to do is to add their swipe tag for them. So if you look at the employee in the list that you've just added, you have a number of icons in the employee screen. This icon is the employee clockings. The next icon is the employee hours. The next icon is the cards and pins and fingerprint templates that are associated with that employee. The next one along is the leave records. The arrow is red when they're out and green when they're in currently. That's the employee number. First name, last name, the department they're in, edit the record and delete the record. So in this instance, we're going to go to John Smith and we're going to go and add a card in the system for John. These are the RFID or proximity swipe tags. They have a number printed on the back. When you want to allocate a tag to that employee, you press the insert button, you look at the back of the tag and you type the numbers without the leading zeros that are on the back of the tag. Once you've typed those numbers in, you can use the drop-down list to make sure it's allocated to John, and then you leave everything else exactly as it is and press add. And now John has that tag added to him, and you can test that at the clock if you want. If we go back to the employee list and we have a look at Joe Bloggs, which was a fingerprint one I added earlier on and put his first and last name in. If we go and look at the tags associated, or the tags, pins and cards associated with John, back at the employees list now, if an employee has a fingerprint registered to them at the clock, you'll see this under their cards and pins. If we go to the employees cards and pins, If we go to the employees cards and pins, this little icon here, and we go to insert, if you saw a fingerprint template shown in there, which is only a stock photo, it's the same for everybody, it's not the individual's fingerprint, it's just a stock photo. If they had a fingerprint registered, it would show a fingerprint image in that box there. If you've registered employees' fingerprints, then there's a number of settings you can change to improve the read rate for employees, or to select how the system is going to work for them when they're using their fingerprint. So in this instance, the fingerprint security is set to low. That's the best setting. That's secure enough for time and attendance, and it also makes the fingerprint a bit easier to read. Fingerprint required. These are the settings that tell the system what login alternatives the employee has. So if they're using PIN, prox or fingerprint allowed, that means that they can use a PIN number if it's allocated, a prox number or an RFID tag if one's allocated to them, and their fingerprint. Any one of those options. If we select prox fingerprint required no PIN, it means they can only use a prox or their fingerprint. Any fingerprint required, fingerprint preferred and fingerprint required are advanced settings that we will discuss in later sessions. Back to the employee screen. That ends this session on how to register employees. The next session will cover employee schedules.